So in this week's Flash episode, Caitlin finally takes another step in finding her father, and Nora and Iris may or may not have finally made up. Let's talk about this week's episode titled All Dolled Up. What is up, speedsters? Welcome to my review and breakdown of The Flash Season 5, Episode 5, titled All Dolled Up. Now, what I will say straight off the bat is that this, in my opinion at least, was the weakest episode of the season. Now, when I say that, don't take that as such face value of, oh, he's shitting on the episode, or that was a bad episode. But it just simply was, out of all the other episodes we've got, all the other 4 episodes so far, just lackluster in comparison to them. Now, what do I mean by that? It was just a lot of filler, and with filler episodes, that doesn't mean they go without some plot developments, because there definitely was. For example, we finally saw Iris and Nora actually somewhat make up. We got a Caitlin development, but overall, I feel like a lot of people were slightly anticipating Ragdoll in a good way, and it was good. But it did feel just like a classical Flash episode that wasn't bad, but it was just like, hey, meta of the week, slightly address Cicada in a tiny way through Cisco and whatnot, and push along some other storylines that you want to address this season as well, like Caitlin's father, and Nora and Iris's relationship. But other than that, there were a couple things that did kind of make me think in this episode, okay, I might have issues with this. But before we discuss all of this, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're brand new and you find yourself liking this video and other videos like this, and why not give this video a like? Click on that like button if you do go ahead and enjoy it. So this episode was fun. I like how it started off with, you know, them addressing how Nora's been kind of a bit missing in the past 2 weeks ever since the fallout of last episode, which, you know, as I feel like everyone in the audience is kind of on both sides. With Iris, you know, sure, she did do it to protect Nora in a billion different ways. I do have a video as to why Iris did take away Nora's speed, or at least I feel like the best running theories with that. So she still very much so is a rookie, despite you know, some of the training from Barry, and they have shown examples of her not jumping into things. So this was definitely a setback, because do you remember that episode where it wasn't exactly Flash time, but she was just thinking before she ran into the situation? I can't remember what it was about, but I'm sure I'm showing the photo on the screen right now, and that showed some development for her. But I guess heroes do get knocked back sometimes. So in the very beginning of this episode, she nearly got an old couple killed through helping out her father sort out a crime. And I really like how Iris and Barry, even though they are like new parents in a way, it definitely gave off a very good, well, at least Iris did, parent telling off to their kid moment. And that's when Iris immediately after that was shouting at Nora, like completely drilling down on her for what she did out there. And that kind of started off this thing that they went through this episode, in terms of how it had to get pointed out to Nora that just because your mom is like this in the future doesn't mean that she isn't a great person now. And she hasn't turned into that person yet. And that doesn't make Iris biblically bad in the future or anything. It's just that the person she is now isn't the person who you get, you know, pissed off with. And I really do want to talk about how this writing, in terms of how Nora and Iris's relationship this episode, should really impact the present if Iris is changing, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, in terms of Cicada development this episode, I'm not so fussed that we didn't get, and I'm not so, let me point this out as well, I'm not so fussed with this episode as a whole anyway. It had to happen at some point for us to get a slightly average episode. Every other episode we've had like a badass ending. This episode we didn't really have Cicada. At least in previous episodes, if it felt like it was going a bit slow, we got some kind of reveal, and that's what Arrow is kind of doing at the minute as well. We're getting some kind of pack a punch at least one point in every episode. And in this episode with Cicada, we got is like Wells finding the area where the satellite may have projected to get this little circumference of where Cicada was at the time. But mainly this episode did just consist of Caitlin development. Yeah, sure, Ragdoll stuff. As for the Caitlin stuff, we had, you know, Cisco vibing throughout the episode, you know, the location of where Caitlin's dad has been, and that led to further clues at this university where they were checking out this chalkboard. And then Cisco kept vibing, he continued to vibe. And actually really, I love, I think I've mentioned this so many times in reviews, but I love Caitlin and Cisco moments. Those two obviously were knew each other before Barry came into the fold for original Team Flash. So when Cisco in this episode, and it was quite sad, kept vibing and putting his health at risk for Caitlin to find out more clues for her father. It led up to that conversation where, you know, those two were just talking to each other about how much he was helping her and how she was having to go at him for not telling her that it was putting him in such pain, because we found out that the dark matter from the alloys, you know, from Cicada's dagger, caused essentially nervous system damage to Cisco, which is pretty messed up. And this did all kind of eventually lead to them finding out, and, you know, even more debating between Ralph and Sherloque Wells there, with how it had to do with Caitlin's mother, and the fact that the last location where her father seemed to have been this massive job of like ruining all the stuff that he was doing at the time. Thus, where could he be now? And is that like one of those blacklisted sites? So surely he's got to be at one of them, and that will lead into next week's episode called The Icicle Cometh. And by the way, check out this video, and I'm not trying to just keep constantly plugging, but I have got a video all about the promo photos in the cards above for that episode, and I'll go over a couple of theories. Now, in terms of standards of Metahumans of the Week, I feel like the story here was, with Ragdoll, was kind of like average. I feel like, you know, I know the voting was going on at the time, but this episode would have served a lot better actually coming out if there wasn't a week's gap in between, because obviously we didn't have the Flash last week. It just would have felt, I guess, a bit more entertaining and spooky if it was actually around Halloween. But now it's just a couple of weeks later. It feels like, okay. I mean, I'm not negating how cool Ragdoll was, because the contortionist moves that this guy can do is fantastic. He was very creepy. I would say it was definitely above some of the other terrible Metahumans of the Week we've had over the past 5 seasons. I'm not saying every single one is terrible, but we have had some very, very poor examples. He was just really, really creepy, whether it was that moment where he was like bashing in his hands so they would go flat so he could fit him in the box. Just stuff like that was brilliant. Now, I actually really like Cecile this episode, and you may be like, why are you saying actually, Boba? Because Cecile, it's not like I have anything against her, it's just more... It's always been the fact of what is she going to do this season, what role is she going to play. They haven't really given her a massive plot yet, that at least unless we find one out, other than the link she has with her daughter and what kind of, you know, outcome is going to come out of that, we have still yet to see. But, you know, this episode, I found her really, really cool and necessary for the discussion she had with Nora. She gave a lot of examples, as I mentioned earlier, like Iris isn't the woman you know her to be in the future, so give her a bit of, you know, cut her the crap, basically, and know that your mother is a person that you would really get along with these days. She hasn't even made that decision, so try and just separate yourself from that. And Cecile did that this episode through pretending to give stories about Barry, but in fact they were all about Iris. And I thought that was a really cool way of doing it. It kind of humanized her mother to Nora a lot more than what she has in the future. She's just made her kind of somewhat out of kind of enemy, you know, and she just found her mother, if anything, really cool, and probably even really respected her by the end. But what Iris did that made her, you know, ultimately cool to Nora in the episode, I seriously didn't know what to think about at the time, and I think you may know what moment I'm thinking about, but I'll get onto that in just a moment. Now, Iris is tagging kind of along with Barry this episode in this Ragdoll investigation. I definitely dig the fact that, you know, she had like a voice memo thing out. She was kind of doing investigative reporting here, and I really thought that moment, that West Allen moment when they were dancing, was very sweet. Now, I really appreciate that moment there. And is it just me? And I don't think they are like driving this to the fans in terms of pointing this out. But I feel like Barry definitely is living a lot more in the moment at the minute. Whether he's doing certain things throughout the episode. But the main example I want to use is when he wanted to dance with her. Sure, you could just be like, as I said, like they didn't have a dance at their wedding. So hey, why not dance? Well, that is just a perfectly normal thing to do for a couple. But just knowing the information that they've learned this season when Barry goes missing in 2024. And I just feel like he's really trying to cherish the moments that he has, because he knows he's not there around when Nora grows up. Whether they prevent this or not doesn't really matter right now. Kind of like a season 3 kind of vibe over there again. Even though that wasn't the case, I'm kind of choosing to look at this as, you know, Barry is trying to make the most out of the next few years whilst he still can, whether they prevent this or not. Now, one thing they definitely did point out in this episode, and Barry even said, make a different choice when you're older. And by the end of this episode, you know, it seems that Iris, even though at first she was like, you know, more or less destiny is destiny and she's going to become that person. But this is where the writing gets involved. And this is where kind of season 3 suffered a little bit for fans. Because I just had to write down and in my thoughts that, okay, since Iris is now more or less not going to be, especially that conversation she had with Nora at the end about you know, how she isn't that person anymore, and she will always be a person you can come to. And you can see how emotional Nora got in that moment, and I love that moment between each other. And this brings up another bit I'm annoyed about as well. Since Iris is now making the conscious decision of not becoming the person that Nora somewhat despises in the future, then, like, shouldn't this surely change the timeline in terms of how, so Nora wouldn't have that opinion now? I know this is getting, you could say, nitpicky, but when you bring in time travel into shows, it does welcome these kind of theories or like criticisms, right? But still, that is such a massive timeline change, arguably already. It's not like Iris was an abusive, terrible mother or anything, but my point being is this would have some change on the present. So make of that what you will. I'd love to know your thoughts there. At the end of the day, in terms of comic book logic and reason why isn't affecting it now, I'm putting it down to the fact that it hasn't rippled out yet into the future, because they've made a point of that on the show before, probably for plot reasons, as to why, yeah, it's not affecting the show right now. Another thing that bothered me about this moment, unfortunately, and I don't normally have a lot of criticisms in the episode at the minute, is but Iris, and I was looking forward to this because I did a video about the promo photos on where we saw Nora writing in a Speed Force journal, and we've all been waiting for this mother flipping journal to come back. And when it does, it turns out she was walking towards Nora when she was writing in it, and she was like, oh, like, you know, I used to do that as well, blah, blah, blah. But she was writing Speed Force symbols into it. Why is nobody talking about that? They haven't even been addressed yet properly. But your daughter is writing them in a journal. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it even interesting that she's got it on her suit? I thought definitely maybe it would be discussed in this episode, and she'd be like, hey, aren't those the same symbols as, you know, what we were dealing with last season and blah, blah, blah. How do you come to learn this? Why are you writing them down in this way? Even if they just gave us an explanation of that, this is how you record shit in the future, that would have been fine, but they didn't. Now, apparently we are getting more emphasis on this in the future, but still, that is a bit of an issue for me. And, you know, take that as you will. And Nora didn't even try to hide it, so it's not like it's anything being hidden. I mean, that should be obvious anyway from the fact that they're on a suit. But please, Flash, give us a good explanation as to what is going on here. Now, I have to say, it was kind of a hit or miss, I feel. I just felt like a lot of fans would feel like this when Ralph was essentially fast traveling over Central City to get to Barry, who Ragdoll took at this point. But I like that. You know, Ralph deserved that. Really cool ability, and there is no reason as to why he couldn't do that. So really cool. Just, it's up to you if you thought that that looked bad in terms of CGI or not. I thought it looked okay for what it is. But the bit, I'm sorry if this pisses anyone off, but I did shout out when I saw this on screen. When Iris jumped off the roof and unlocked the keys to Barry's metahuman cuffs, and then that obviously gave him his powers back so he could, you know, save her. And that's what Nora dug. And this was badass. Don't get me wrong, that was badass. But I just thought there's things you can do in comic books and you know, and translate to TV that you could argue could easily happen in a comic book and might even be a cool read in the way they do it there. But I just feel like that didn't blend so well on TV. Like, she could have gone splat. Just like that. I don't know. I just feel like people are going to get annoyed at this bit. But I know there's probably going to be a lot of people out there that thought this was ridiculous as well. I don't think that it was mega ridiculous, because I think that, you know, Iris would jump off to save Barry maybe. And maybe I'm answering my own question here. But it just didn't feel massively believable. But other than that, guys, that was the main gist of the episode. So I have to say, like, despite it being my least favorite episode of the season, in terms of fillery episodes, you know, which, as I said, do come along with a bullet point or two of plot development in one way or another, it still was an average episode. If episode 5, all dolled up, is as bad or as worse as the Flash episodes can get this season, then by all means, I am extremely happy. This episode was okay, but, you know, let's hope that this is the bottom line for how they can get this season. And if that will be the case, then this season is going to be a fantastic season, possibly even rivaling season 1 and 2, maybe 2. But you know what I mean, guys. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below about this episode. What did you think about my thoughts? Do you agree with any of them? Do you disagree with any of them? But if you enjoyed this video, guys, it would really help out the video if you click that like button if you did enjoy it, especially if you got this far. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Links to follow me and everything like that are down in the description below to certain social medias. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you speedsters in the next video. Goodbye.